All right. Welcome, everybody, to the panel Pacing and Storytelling with Constant Death here at LudoNarraCon 2021. Thanks for coming to our panel. I'm Tanya Short. I'm the captain of Kitfox Games. We made games like Moon Hunters and Shattered Planet, which had a good amount of death. Oh, the Shrouded Isle, also very deathy. And now Boyfriend Dungeon also has the same sort of pacing, but it treats death a little differently. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. And I'll be moderating this panel. Would everybody else like to introduce yourselves, please?
Okay. I'm Tarn Adams. I'm a co-founder of Bay 12 Games, and I work on the game Dwarf Fortress with my brother Zach. Well, I guess with our publisher Kitfox over there. Also, our game is pretty death oriented as well. The dwarves don't have it easy. Also the entire fort dies and kind of continues on as well. So yeah, there's quite a bit of death in our game. We kind of use as a narrative device in lots of ways. I guess we'll be talking about.
I can go next. I'm Adam Saltzman, and I was the sort of systems designer and director on Overland, which has arguably too much death in it. We can talk about that a little bit too, probably. Yeah. I guess the thing we're probably working on next is not procedurally generated, but still has to figure out what you do with death and storytelling. Also, it turns out. So it's definitely stuff on my mind lately.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyler Sigmund, co-founder of Red Hook Studios. We made Darkest Dungeon, and we're feels like forever, but we're almost finally going to release Darkest Dungeon 2, and Darkest Dungeon has a lot of death in it, including death of keyboards and mice and controllers and monitors and things like that. And yeah, it's a really important part of the game, I think, which I'm excited to talk about, because it's not like we set out to make a game about death, but death certainly is important to the enjoyment of the game.
Why don't we start with that? Why don't we start with how death became part of the core user experience of Darkest Dungeon, and maybe we can go out from there.
Sure. Yeah. Darkest Dungeon has a lot of roguelike elements, and one of those is permadeath that is not obviously unique to our game, but I think from the beginning, like the whole like core idea of Darkest Dungeon was, what would it really be like to be a hero? If we take away the flash and the sex appeal of like going down and fighting skeletons, like, oh my God, going down and fighting skeletons, like that's really bad. Running out of light, running out of food. And so we knew really like that core idea, no matter how else we did it, we wanted you to bond with these heroes, but you were not the hero yourself. You were directing these heroes, and then they're going to meet some grisly fates. And it was really important to us emotionally that you have to deal with that, either callously or actually get hurt by it or whatever. And so I think death was always core, just because without risk, there's no real sense of accomplishment in that sense. It's kind of like having a DM that they roll out in the open. If you've had dungeon masters that roll behind the screen, like for the good of the game, the good of the party, the good of everyone's enjoyment, they might not kill your character for just a really stupid thing like stepping on a nail and rolling 1, 1, 1, 1. So Darkest Dungeon is kind of like a DM that rolls in the open. That like at any point you might get 20'd and there you go. So that tension was important to the core.
And that's unique to games, right? Like the idea of taking a risk at all is such a unique and yet core game gambit that we as designers offer the players, that they can choose what they're risking, whereas that's not really part of more passive media. But I guess the question is, like, what are they really risking in our different games, right? Like, how did you end up quantifying risk in any different ways, or did it change over development at all of how you communicate that risk, or how the story sort of includes that transformation of like valuing actions versus like, oh, well, they could literally die, which is like in real life one of the worst things. Maybe not the worst thing. I'm actually death positive myself, but like, you know, I support death in some circumstances, but generally try to avoid it so far. And I think most people take a similar approach in games and in life. But yeah, I don't know. Like, did your design change towards death in any of your games as development went on, or your perception of how the user wove it into their narrative?
On a thing that we had to deal with a lot in Overland almost right away, like right after we got the first kind of prototype where you could play for like 20 minutes. You could have like a little adventure and you would play like 5 encounters or something. And almost right away it was like, okay, we probably should have a game that's longer than 5 encounters one way or another. You know, what does that look like? How do we stretch that out? But you know, there's a lot that we like about this design. There's like high stakes. It feels like your choices are really meaningful as a player, because if you make the wrong choice, then you do perish. Like that character disappears forever because you, the player, you know, goofed something up. And I like that. And right away it was like, it's too binary. It's too much. Like this is way too, this is valid feedback and this is strong feedback, but it's also way too much. We can't like tune this or play with this really. So almost right away, lots of like mitigating factors coming in that were kind of like death related or like proxies for death. So item fragility, HP, like all of these things where, the thing I was surprised about was how meaningful things could be like short of death. Like that you could have lots of consequences in a system that has permadeath intentionally, that you could have so many other consequences that were super meaningful. And I think like in our game, for better or for worse, the death of your car ended up frequently meaning more than the death of a person. But the death of a dog meant more than either one.
I was going to say
drastically. So there's always like balance. Like cars were systemically more valuable than people. And so you'd start to value your car over a person, but dogs are very cute. So you're like, well, I don't care about the car anymore. Like everything's up for grabs now. Like, you know, we'll do anything as long as the dog doesn't die. But yeah, I think that transition for us was very much about wanting expression, wanting stakes, wanting players to feel like they were doing something meaningful, but realizing that like, if death is the only knob we have to turn for this, then we're getting something that's like, it's pretty flat, but also it's like hard to sustain that amount of dread for that long. Like if you put people on the brink of dying all the time, like Dark Souls doesn't even do this, right? Like it wears people down, I think.
I mean, Tyler and Taryn, you both have games that are theoretically prolonging the dread as long as possible is sort of the whole game, right?
Well, I was thinking about that because I mean Tyler brought up permadeath and Adam brought up kind of mitigating the consequences. Another thing you can do, which kind of happened even in the early roguelikes, was this kind of idea of death not being the end. In terms of like bones files, where they were called in Hack, where you could kind of find your old characters, and Dwarf Fortress is just a giant bones file for everything that you do, basically. Like if a dwarf dies, we wanted the player to just not have it be the end there. And so although we haven't really changed our approach there, what we did do is just kind of add more and more ways for people to memorialize dwarves. Like some people like will make half of their fortress a giant tomb for a dwarf they liked, and it's sort of like a necropolis or something, right? And with people living in it, sadly, still. But you can make statues and have them be about specific events in the dwarf's life, and the game will kind of help you out with that kind of thing. There's also ghosts and people coming back from the dead, that kind of thing. So I mean, you can really play with it a lot. And I mean, it reminds me of all these kind of sort of modern takes on things like Hades and stuff, where you sort of roll death into the story moving forward, whereas in Dark Souls you're kind of like rolling it more into like skill gain, right, or something, and that kind of, you know, like those old Nintendo games. It's like Contra, and it's harder than Dark Souls to me, or whatever. But
I totally agree with that.
And but well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just gonna start rambling now because I'm like, what about world tendency or whatever? I don't know anything about
That's
that.
the true death.
I mean, I think you're like Dwarf Fortress and Dark's Dungeon, though. One of the advantages we have, the reason we can maybe, I mean, it feels like Dark's Dungeon is like intentionally putting the dread on you, where Dwarf Fortress is like right when you think you're safe, you unleash a giant stream of magma or something. But the trick is two things, I think. You're maintaining a roster, so losing a hero or a dwarf doesn't end your game. And actually, something on Dark's Dungeon that we still sometimes have to challenge the perception of is people say, well, you know, sometimes my estate just gets so bad I start over, and we're like, but they're actually, unless you're playing the NG plus type mode, you can't fail. So like, it's really death in Dark's Dungeon is a setback but not failure. So I think that the difference of consequence versus outright failure is something to play with. I mean, yeah, Dark Souls has done really well where it kind of is failure in a way, or a consequence. But I'm thinking like Last of Us or something, which I did enjoy, but death is just absolute failure, right? Like, oops, rewind, do it again. Oops, rewind, do it again. So I think one reason we're able to keep the pressure up, say, on Dark's Dungeon is it's really just a matter of what you're willing to accept, but you never fail.
Yeah, that was a
almost
little.
like oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just thinking, like, Dark Souls is funny in the way it treats death, because it often, I feel like it's treated like it's a really hardcore approach, but I think when you get into it, you find that it's incredibly generous, and that if you essentially like, death is only bad if you have a lot of money in your pockets, essentially. If you're broke, you can die as much as you want. It's fine. And actually, it's an asset. If you're broke, you can jump off a cliff, grab a shield on the way down, splatter at the bottom, and respawn at the top, and you're fine. Like, you left $5 at the bottom of the canyon. You know, who cares? You got this dope shield. So it's like, it's very, it has this flip to it where, like, dying often does feel like a huge deal in Dark Souls, but every once in a while, it's just like teleporting. It's fine. It's great. It's a shortcut.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like they play it up as well, and all of the aesthetics of dying still act like it's always super important. It's like the most important, like, you died. It was like a meme for a while, right?
But every once in a while, you're like, phew, got that sweet sword, though.
Like, oh, all right. Whew, now I get back to where I wanted to be.
Up there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, in Moonhunters, we didn't actually have death. Like, it was a roguelike where if you quote unquote died, you like ended your little mini level and sort of moved on with your life, as it were. And then at the end of the game, it would sort of reflect on what you did, and that was sort of the real evaluation of how bad did you fail or not, based on what you were trying to do. Like, if you were a foolish hero trying to do lots of foolish things. We were trying to play with it narratively to show that, you know, how you're remembered isn't always super accurate. So sometimes the things that people would say about your hero was like sort of what you did, but not really. And some people thought that was a bug, unfortunately, instead of a feature. But it was a feature, I tell you. But I guess I think that's my favorite realm to think about now, is like what does it mean after death in an interestingly written game? Because I feel like in passive media, you often see death as a transformation, at least for the other characters. You see, like, it's very rare for a popular story these days to end in death. That might be a climax of some kind, or well, God forbid, a fridge at the beginning or something. But you know, it should. That life goes on in some way, dramatically, and yet games, I think, are still trying to figure out a way for what does that mean other than picking a different character. Like, is there anything more interesting to be done post-death? I don't know, that games haven't done yet. Does anybody have any ideas around that, or stories or memories? I don't know.
I have a weird one, which I was thinking about this, just when you post the questions, we got to think about, and yeah, like going back to arcade, death is like you failed, but the challenge was cool. How can I learn to get better and get a higher score? But one thing I was thinking would be neat is if the manner of your death directly affects the progression of the game. So, like there's cool things like, Rogue Legacy where you die and then you just the concept that you're an heir is kind of cool. Like the idea that, or like you're saying you memorialize, going back to original Rogue where you get the little tombstone, like they died from a slime on level 3. But wouldn't it be wild if if your character burned up and then the next character is like vulnerable to fire or, something weird like that. So like not only the fact that you died, but the exact manner, because wouldn't it be neat if you knew you're on the way out, like you were saying with grabbing the shield on the way down? If you knew you're on the way out and you're like, I want to perish in this manner because it's going to set me up for the next.
That's the most gamey answer I've ever heard. I think that was the dream of Hello Neighbor, actually, was that like you would keep trying with this AI who would like learn from you and adapt every time you failed or succeeded, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I like this idea because like there's an idea of choice in it, and there's like a very particular kind of agency fantasy of like, I see the end is near. I'm choosing how I go.
That's definitely what we all hope, right?
Yeah, like I want to go. I want to die fighting dragons so that I wake up with +5 to dragon fire next time, kind of a thing. But I think that's valid because like there is kind of. It's so easy to get your game into a place where there's inevitability and there's, anticipation can come along with that. Lots of things can come along with that. But every once in a while, it's just like, well, I'm babysitting this thing for a while until it's all over and I can like get back to the fun part again. And I like the idea of like investing those last moments with like something meaningful. Because normally the thing that you would do right before you die in the game doesn't mean anything. Like, it's just like, that's the last thing that you did that doesn't matter anymore now. Unless you grabbed that shield, in which case you're good.
Yeah, I mean, that actually reminds me of how I used to play NetHack. Like our rule with my brother and I was before you die, if you knew you were going to die or thought you were going to die, or even suspected it was like a 50-50 thing, you always had to name the monster that was going to kill you because it would appear in your next game on the level where you died, and it was kind of and it would also appear on your score list as the monster that killed you. So this kind of idea that that's the gift that you're giving, at least to your brother, and you always name it something that's going to be amusing or something like that. And it's
the original Nemesis system. The patent belongs to Tarn, actually.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to get too far into that because I might hear from somebody, but it like. Yeah, no, it's funny. Our system was called the Nemesis system before they even started designing their game. But yeah, best that they, yes. Anyway, there's also intriguing ones in like multiplayer environments, like MUDs, where a character can die, but then other people can go retrieve the body, and they have like a whole morgue set up and that kind of thing. That's sort of fascinating. I've only seen that a few times in single player games where you can like create a whole sort of specialist character that will go fetch the body. It's like if you're playing Dark Souls with two characters and one of them fetched the bodies and one of them pressed forward, and then you fetch and pressed forward and fetched and pressed forward, stuff like that. There's all kinds of dynamics that you can
I could see a Dark Souls virtual world that had that kind of healer weirdo for sure.
There's a cool. I can never remember what the game is called, which is totally my fault. But there was an open world game, a kind of survival open world thing that dropped like a year or two ago, and their death mechanism was that if you you got murdered by a bear in the forest or something, you would like wake up bandaged, injured in a cave somewhere with like a note from a stranger who was like, hey, I found you. You were on death's door. I got you some herbs. I got to move on. Good luck out there, buddy. But they would have also kind of like redeemed themselves a little payment from something you had on you. And I think about this a lot when we're thinking about
what game was this?
I don't remember what it's called. No! I feel like I should, because I think about this
really
design
clever.
thing all the
That's
time,
really
and how
charming.
nice and clever it is. Partly for the little narrative elements, but partly because they've kind of like taken a death moment and they've turned it into a set of distinct consequences, some of which are out of your control, but all of which invest your next moments with this like weird steps of discovery that you have to do. Where am I now? How far away am I from where I was a second ago? What did they take? Oh, that thing? Like, you have this like little like rebirth moment.
Which is what it should feel like, right? Like if you came close to death and like came back, you probably would need to like take stock of like, okay, where are we now actually? And that's like the last thing you ever do when you die in a game. You're like, oh, I'm here. Yeah, okay, perfect. I don't need to look at where I am anymore. I know exactly what's happening.
I like too that you wouldn't necessarily just be like, throwing yourself back against the same wall. You've been given like an opportunity to like throw yourself against a different wall maybe, or like, maybe try an alternate path around instead of getting to that rhythm of like, oh, I almost did that one thing. I'm going to try it in almost the exact same way again and see what happens, which is like definitely its own kind of fun. But I think about this other setup a lot and how adaptable it is. Like how many games could totally structure death this way super functionally? Have you pass out, wake up on a park bench, somebody took your coat, but like you're more or less okay. You just need to get some rest.
I think that continuity is the challenge, where like from a design standpoint, I think it's a real easy trap to fall into, because what do you really want to happen when the player dies? And so I think a lot of times that I don't think it's that well thought out, and not that every game can manage to do that continuity cycle, but I do think that occasionally we design like, again, like, do you want consequence or do you want failure? And, sometimes I definitely am playing a game and I'm just like, okay, I get it. That's hard, but it's a frustrating thing versus say aspirational, whereas like arcade games for whatever reason felt aspirational because you knew that it was possible to get a higher score. And if you die, if you lose your ship early in Galaga, that's your own fault. And and I think that's why Dark Souls, it's weird. I was trying to figure this out really, because, Dark Souls got so popular, and not to take anything away from it, but it was just returning us to the idea of consequence, from kudos in the mobile world to actual consequence. But I think that it's really easy. I don't even want to say lazy. It's just an easy trap to fall into as a designer to end up making it a roadblock. How many of us have stopped a game where you're like, you die in the game and then you're like, fuck it. Like, I wanted to play this game, but I'm just frustrated now. And I think that's bad unless you were actually trying to drive a player away, which I don't think any of us want to.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of talking about this conflicting goals this game sometimes have, mastery versus this sort of experiential, exploratory playfulness. And when the player's trying to do one and they get the other, then it's very difficult. And maybe that's the real genius of Dark Souls difficulty and death, is that when you are going for mastery, you do end up with a lot of money in your pockets, and death matters more. But when you're going more exploratory, more playful, you don't tend to have a lot of money in your pocket, so it's fine, and death doesn't matter. And it's like somehow they managed to support both of those plays in a very intentional way from the player, so that like their story is coherent in either case, which is very difficult for most games to do.
They have a weird idea, like real death in Dark Souls is when your money pile disappears because you died twice in a row.
Right.
That's real death in Dark Souls, which is pretty interesting. Like it's very much you get a free try, bucko, but you better be able to get in and out this time. Like it's again, like it strikes me as something that's so generous, and it's such an interesting way to bring back otherwise what I think seem like very retro sensibilities of like, oh no, this thing came out of nowhere. It doesn't even have a health bar. You just got beefed. You have no idea by what. You've never been here before. But you haven't really died. You don't really have consequences in that moment, but you've just been given an assignment. And I think that's the thing that makes it kind of interesting, is like death is like a new little side job you have, kind of like this hauling bodies back thing, right? Like I think it actually has a lot to do with that in terms of your experience. But this gets at the thing, I think, at the core of some of this, which is like, at least as a designer, from like a designer POV, you love consequences because consequences invest meaning. But at least for me, it's very easy to fall into a trap of sort of assuming that consequences are interesting because of this.
Yeah, like they're intrinsically
right
meaningful.
and they're just absolutely not at all. Like so many consequences are so boring and they're so uninteresting and they're so not meaningful, and it can be from very small changes. Like I'm playing a game that I kind of like got I fell off it like last night after having a lot of fun playing it the night before, and nothing about the game changed. It's all the same combat rules. It's all the same everything. It's all the same rules around death, but it's little small things about the spacing of save points and the X, Y, and Z that are making it's just tipped over into slightly too repetitive. There's not quite enough for me to do. Like the consequences aren't quite interesting enough anymore. And the game rules and the systems didn't change, but all this context around it for me as a player changed. It's a thing that I think it fills me with dread as a designer, because it's just like, woof, consequences are great, but they're also fussy. And this is like, I don't know, it's a lot of responsibility. Death is a lot of responsibility, in my opinion.
It's a good quote. I actually wanted to say one of my favorite deaths in games was actually the sequence of deaths that I had in Crusader Kings 3. I was playing through it quite a bit, and I swear I had 3 heirs all assassinated by the same person, and I never found them. Like I kept trying to figure out like who is assassinating my people, and I found out that one of my grandchildren was assassinated by my unfavored son, so that checks out. But like why? But I kept getting these pop-ups of like, you have died due to mysterious circumstance, or like you have died on the road, and you're like, oh, okay, that was an assassination, you don't need to talk down to me. But like in the story of my family, it would be nice to know who did it. So I tried doing investigation. It didn't really support it, but I still like that story of like, and even though I stepped away from the game sort of after that, I'm probably going to pick it up again when there's a DLC or something, because I want to see how my family's deaths, which are inevitable because they get old, right? Like they're going to die at some point. And so it's all about like managing the through line
they have that
of your
crazy
legacy
feature in there that is so gamey when you think about it. It makes no like sense, but it's really cool, where if you invest in that one talent tree or whatever, I'm using the wrong terms, but you'll be given a 1-year warning before you die of natural causes. So it's like, because then you can set your whole affair.
Oh, I would love that. They should have that in real life.
I know, but aren't there like, there's got to be a lot of science fiction about that. The whole question of like, if you knew, like if you could take a genetic test and it would tell you. But it's interesting that that's like an opt-in gaminess, and it has real value, because I will say one of the most startling things of Crusader Kings, but also works really well, is that suddenness at which death can occur. Like we were talking about, oh, you see it coming, like there's a big boss, I want to avoid it. Oops, my health bar is going down. But here you're just happily cruising along, and that pop-up comes up, and it's just really terrifying.
If anybody is interested in some stories about this kind of thing, I actually remember I did read a really good short story anthology called Machine of Death. Co-edited, and the concept was by Ryan North of Dinosaur Comics. But there are a bunch of really cool stories, and the machine is, if you press the button, it will tell you what you will die of and when, I think, as well. But maybe just what cause of death. I think it's just cause of death. And its effects on various psychologies. If you're a teenager and you find out you die in a fire, like how does that change your life? But yeah, and it's storytelling and death, not related to games at all, but it was very inspirational for me some years ago.
I like the CK3 scenario of all these like mysterious deaths adding up to some kind of implied phenomenon behind the scenes, because like presumably there's a universe where they were just random deaths. And now like you, the player, are put in the position of being this like paranoid matriarch who's trying to like protect their line, and you've suffered these natural tragedies, but you've ascribed meaning and system to them, and now
it's safer that way, Adam.
Yeah, now you're like Macbething around the kingdom, causing all sorts of distress because like you've experienced this thing that is hard and is tragic or whatever.
Yeah, I'd be curious to talk. I mean, maybe next, if I ever do this panel again, I should have a paradox person here. I'd be curious to know if there is any like storytelling, pacing consideration there, because you don't ever get like tons of deaths in a row, but maybe that's just part of how the system works, rather than a consideration of pacing. But I don't know. I'd love to think there was.
There was one thing I wanted to bring up for death and storytelling from our game, because it's something that's been divisive, and it's because it has an element of narrative finality to it, I think, and it's something that's been the only people who say that they cried when the game ended are because of how we approached the ending of the game, and the only people who beat the game and are pretty upset and disappointed with me personally are because of how the game ended, because it's we made a decision a long time ago, spoilers, that it was not going to be a kind of blockbuster story. It's a post-apocalyptic story about being there at the end times, and then the times end. And that's the thing that happens, and you don't find the alien mothership and get in and blow it up, or you don't find, oh, all we had to do the whole time was spray them with water or whatever, right? There's no Wizard of Oz ending. It just kind of, it goes to a place. And that was a story that I wanted to tell because I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like, this would be such a weird way. This would be such a weird experience to have this thing. And I'm sure it came from, I don't know, like, if you've ever been on a really bad airplane flight that had like bad enough turbulence for long enough that you were just like, I think I'm at peace, actually. Like, I think I'm ready to go. There's a lot of like airplane wine on me right now because this thing is shaking all over the place. But like, I think I'm at peace.
I mean, this is way off topic, but I have actually looked up like monks in Bhutan and like studies on happiness, that you should actually think about death regularly, like your own personal mortal situation. It's supposed to long term help with
I wish
your
that I could have been I wanted to be in a scenario where that was more like opt-in. I feel like the airplane kind of like,
yeah, we shouldn't force it on our players. I mean, maybe we shouldn't shake their airplanes like without consent. I don't know.
Yeah, but I wanted to tell this story where there was like there was an ending, and like you know, you survived, you beat the game, but it is the end of the world still. And we were really stuck as designers and writers and storytellers. It was like, well, how are we going to tackle this? Like, is there a gnashing and a wailing? You know, is it you know, sort of a bacchanalia? You know, by the time you've reached the Pacific Ocean, like, what's the human expression of this? Like, what piece of humanity are we interested in talking about, or what part do we want to show at the end of this story? And we opted to essentially like have a little funeral, kind of, or like the part of the thing that you do after the funeral. So there's not a lot of ritual anymore. There's just kind of like talking about the stuff that stood out to you, sort of. And I think it's of continual interest to me to talk to people who you know, were really, really open to that. And to them, it felt like this is, you know, this was a super interesting, valid experience to have emotionally playing this game, especially. And then also to have people like, well, no, but that's the part you find the colony. They've got the wall, and that keeps everybody safe. Or there's a boat. So there's a boat, and then you go onto the boat, you can make it, right? Like, that's the thing that happens at the end. Yeah, it feels like there's I'm sure part of this is on me as a designer, and there's lots of expectation setting where probably we could have like got more people on board with this idea. But I think it is a little bit heady. Like, I think it's kind of hard to get into a game space and to do stories about finality. And I think it's one reason why we have, you know, HP 0, game over, retry, is because that's a lot lighter weight, I think.
I mean, at the end of the day, most of us are making games that people come to as entertainment products, right? Like, even if we're trying to make a meaningful reflection of the human condition, or the, you know, dwarf suffering, or whatever it may be, people
dwarf condition
are probably sitting down expecting to have a good time. So when we when we try to make them think about their own death and and society, maybe they're not ready for it most of the time.
It's the big thing, right? Like there's an Onion video from years and years and years ago where it's like, breakthrough, scientists get gorilla to consider own mortality.
Yeah, you see its eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we invited Katie Kiranis from Elsinore to come. Unfortunately, she couldn't come today, but I was really looking forward to hearing from her. Everybody who's watching this panel should absolutely go look up Elsinore immediately, because it has one of the most interesting takes on one of the most famous deaths, in literature, taking Hamlet and looking at it from different perspectives and letting you sort of play around with the variables that lead to various outcomes. I can't speak to anything about the design or the writing of it. I just wanted to shout it out as an interesting meditation and an interesting creation related to this topic. And I think it does have a little bit of that insight, but also some entertainment. So it's maybe something we can all look at. But it looked like, Tyler, you wanted to say something.
No, I have a question for
earlier.
Tarn on, is death of the fortress inevitable, or is there such a thing as a perpetual dwarf fortress?
Oh, we have players that are very good at things now. Like there's the Arch Crystal's fortress that lasted for some 400 years. They went down, they colonized hell, turned it into a zoo. They brought up the magma and have the magma in like a giant glass ring or pipe floating above their fortresses made out of glass. And it's just like a giant, like, they're just kind of like, yes, we're good at this game. And
They ascended. Yeah.
yeah. No, you can never stop the players from just, unless your game is like chess or something, when you can just have the computer kill them every time now. But they're just always going to mock you if you try and kill them.
That goes to that, like, Tanya, you asked about pacing of the deaths in Crusader King. I don't know, but I'm guessing that Crusader King's Darkest Dungeon and Dwarf Fortress have a similarity in that, at least we've found that the more we try to control it, the worse it gets. So we shape mechanics or whatever. So we do
in terms of like pacing and timing, you mean?
Yeah, like for example, maybe put it another way, that the most intriguing, interesting hero stories come about because we didn't try to control, because of these weird collections of factors. And, I would think this is definitely true of Dwarf Fortress, but I'd be curious to get Tarn's opinion. But with all the interlocking systems, it's like at some point you can just go, I don't have to pace this. It's going to be weird because, like in a good way. Sometimes you're going to have like fortresses that die before they even start, and other times you go on this big long run. And I think it's that very, it's the opposite of a movie screenplay, where you're like, we got to have the inciting event by page 10 or whatever. I think the mere fact that it can be so wildly different engages you because you just don't know what's coming.
It's complicated, of course, because you can imagine a situation where you've made a very complicated, boring game, and you need the player to be able to get into trouble if they want to. You need we don't have like a drama manager. I mean, like RimWorld's an example of one that has like a more intentional kind of story management system, and we don't have anything like that, except I guess arguably the stuff that's sort of placeholdery, like our siege triggers and stuff. But if you're not going to manage your drama at all, and the player is not allowed to kind of find, like, either investigate what's interesting about their fortress and then build something according to that, or go out in the world like they can now and it just cause trouble if they want, or throw the trade caravan, like people have, like the drowning system where we don't need to trade, we can just drown the caravan when it comes, and then at least works for a while, and like that kind of thing. If you give them a way to engage, but if you're just kind of having them play in a sandbox that is just grains of sand, and they're just, there's nothing to it except the fact that they fall over each other and so forth, but there's no kind of names or structure that you can put over it, anything that can kind of create more traditional narrative in their head, at least, that you don't get it for free. You have to, it's all intentional design in the end. There's no escape from doing our jobs, sadly.
Damn. I just had a question for Tyler about something you said earlier, because it was something that we ended up thinking about a lot, and we had like controversy within our team about how to approach this, which was the idea of really intentionally designing deaths in your game in a way that was not ambivalent to the player, but where like the player's attitude about it would be like participatory almost, that they would be part of it. So like in I was pretty adamant about including the ability to straight up murder strangers in our game, even though it mostly goes against the grain of what you do most of the time, because it seemed like an interesting thing to not do most of the time. But we do have, there's like a subset of players who are like pretty mercenary about it. They've decided to just not be invested in digital character death. And this is a machine, and like, this is a business, and I'm going to run it well, damn it. And I was curious to hear a little bit more about that, because it was definitely something that was on our minds a lot, for sure.
Yeah, you know, I like what you said there about we included it because it's an interesting thing not to do. That's really cool. I'm gonna have to think about that. That really like is a neat concept. But I think that negative space in a way is similar to we wanted you, like I said, the core thesis like that Chris Baressa came up with originally was you know, just this like it would be horrible to be an adventurer. You know, like because usually, you know, you start with the imbued idea that we're doing a valid cause, you know, we got to slay the dragons, rescue the person, whatever. But, you know, what would it really be like? So what that is really saying is we want you to care about their travails, you know, about these characters' ups and downs. But the really interesting thing is you can often proceed faster by being mercenary, like you said. Like, I'm going to run this business into the, you know, like I don't, like, you know, Bezos. Like, I don't care who's got to pee in a bottle. Like, we're going to get this package to you on time. I hope I don't get sued into oblivion. But he didn't say that. We just attribute that to their philosophy. Okay, so anyway, but the thing that happens in Darkest Dungeon, where like we gave you the ability to name a hero. We want you to care about the hero. Chris drew them in a way that makes them kind of comic, just cute enough that you care. But what happens is the negative space happens where you realize, wait a second. And, you know, a quick way to make money is hire 4 new heroes. Don't even give them any food or torches. Send them into the dungeon. Get as much as you can. Let 3 die. And right before the last one dies, retreat. Keep the money. He's going to be wrecked. Dismiss him. Hire 4 new ones. And we didn't purposefully make it that you should do that. But it's cool that you could make the argument that that's the more efficient way to play the game. But we want you to then someone else to make the argument that, but you're missing the point. Like, you're responsible for these. Like, you're a psychopath. You're a villain.
Yeah.
And you see it in how they name people, right? Because some people name them, you know, after their favorite whatever, and other people are just like Crusader 1, Crusader 2, Crusader 3. They're like divesting themselves from even the possibility of caring.
Yeah,
and it's like when you don't name your goldfish or whatever.
Yeah, you're like, let's not, you know, name it.
this is the away party member who has no name. You've never seen him on the show before.
Yeah.
It's not going to end well.
So I think they're just by making it that you can care about somebody, it opens the opportunity for you to not care about them. But I think in a weird way, yeah, maybe we could have closed some of those loopholes. Like, you could have not included the ability to murder other people. By including it doesn't mean you want them to.
It's like, are you allowed to really say like retweets are not endorsements here, or like I still have mixed feelings about including a lot of it, because it's like, it's kind of upsetting and it kind of like does go against the flow. But I definitely, as a designer, cling to the idea that it's like slightly more meaningful somehow that your nurturing is voluntary. Like that this is a collaborative play practice on some level, like you're cooperating with the game. And part of that is that the game has made a slightly bigger space than the one that you've chosen to use. But maybe that's like not true. Like maybe that's just made up. I don't have data on this, or like I don't have metrics or anything. Just like feels that way, I guess.
Well, I think anytime, I mean, my feeling as a player and a designer, I think, is anytime the player can anticipate something that is both a stronger narrative moment and a stronger gameplay moment, like whether it's authored or it's systemic and procedural, whatever. Like the point is that they have that story themselves of experiencing like something's going to happen and then something, and maybe that not that exact thing happened. It's usually most satisfying when something kind of like that happened. But like that's, and whether that includes death or not is sort of a separate, more tense topic. But yeah, the anticipation there, I think it was you, Adam, who went on about anticipation. I think that is the key for me.
Probably
to storytelling generally.
It's on my mind a lot, but I was just thinking about a weird Dwarf Fortress thing, which is like, and it's a thing for a lot of these games, a lot of these squad-based,
2-minute warning, by the way. We should.
Lightning round. Attribution, like player attribution of motivations, I think is something that became like deeply fascinating to me, especially. Our game was small squads, and you tell them all the things to do, and so people would click on a person, they would get this terrible option to murder someone and take all their stuff. They would do it, and then they would be like, "How dare that person? That was horrible. that was a terrible action."
Why did they have that idea?
Yeah,
I mean that is role playing in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But I was thinking about Dwarf Fortress in this regard because it's like, I think really. For that, because it's a little more indirect. There's like, I've given this thing goals, but it has an agency outside of my own, and so attribution is like my primary thing here, and it doesn't have quite the same you take your action figure, push over the other action figure, and then yell at the first action figure for being naughty sort of dynamic.
I mean, but the question of why did you die is it can have so many answers, right? If it's a well-designed game.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the, sometimes it's satisfying because you were at fault, and then other times, weirdly, it's satisfying when it's out of your control. Like in Crusader Kings, you get the plague, you die, and it is really cool when you're forced to proceed with that. Like I was playing on Iron Man, and normally I would probably reload because I just want to gold break my way through, but it's just like we ask people to do in Darkest Dungeon, like just kind of accept it and move on. And that's an interesting space because there are so many games that don't let you accept it and move on. They make you rewind and succeed. So it's, I'm not saying one's better than the other. I just think it's definitely interesting to introduce the concept of like non-permanent failure.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I'm going to be thinking about that attribution of the action figures for a while. That's an interesting player dynamic for sure. Did you have any last comments, Tarn, before we close it up?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about reactivity and agency, just like Tyler said. Those two things are what make emergent narrative work. You need the pushback from the simulation, and you need the player to be able to invest themselves in the story. That give them enough options, let them do what they want to do, let them think about what they want to think about, but then surprise them. It's all it takes, really.
All right. Well, that's our panel on pacing and storytelling with constant death. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and tune in next time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.